On behalf of the University of Colorado Boulder, welcome to the 73rd Conference on World Affairs, an annual event attracting thought leaders and experts from around the world to our campus. Usually, this week is marked by a bustling campus of students, community members, and alumni. But in an effort to keep everyone safe, this year's conference is virtual, with speakers joining conversations remotely. We look forward to the day when we can host you all again for in-person events. But for now, we're grateful for your continued support by enjoying the conference from home. I'm sure you'll like this year's lineup of more than 80 speakers addressing a variety of topics, including this year's conference themes: racism in the U.S., healthcare, and Generation Z. I want to thank CWA Faculty Director John Griffin and CWA Program Chair Lori Leinonen for fostering this long-standing university and community collaboration. This partnership has helped make the CWA successful for more than 70 years. I also want to applaud the efforts of the entire CWA Program Committee of CU students and community volunteers who showed great resilience in assembling an impressive program under challenging circumstances. Congratulations to the Conference on World Affairs for another successful event. Enjoy the conference and go Buffs!
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the 2021 Conference on World Affairs. My name is Jeff Du Bois, and it is my pleasure to get things started today. As you just heard, this is the 73rd year the University of Colorado Boulder has hosted this conference. And this year, it comes during a time of great disruption and change, grief and reflection. As you all know, our daily lives at work and at home, one and the same for many of us, were turned upside down by the pandemic. It feels like we're moving into a new phase of recovery now, but over the past 12 months, we've been witness to health and economic crises, protests over acts of injustice, an election cycle here in the US that will go down in the history books, a riot at the United States Capitol, and unspeakable acts of violence against individuals because of who they are and how they look. And I'd like to take a moment. I think I can speak for every single person joining us today when I say, our thoughts are with the Boulder community during this time of grief and mourning. It is a despair that far too many families and communities have endured over the years. I am hopeful that your community can start to heal and that the events of last month will lead to more conversations, as difficult as those conversations are, to prevent horrible violence like this in the future. Of course, we know there is a lot to overcome for that to happen and a lot of work that needs to be done. We all know that. But we can hold out hope, and we can be intentional with our own actions to bring the change that is desperately needed in this country and in the world. And that's actually what the Conference on World Affairs is all about, bringing people together to learn, to share, and to grow. This week-long event was established to engage and to educate and to inspire people around the world. And so that is exactly what we're going to do, starting right now. This opening session of the conference is about social consciousness in the high-tech industry. We've put together, I think, quite an interesting hour of conversation that I hope will spark some questions and will move you to action. We'll hear from a Microsoft corporate vice president who is on a mission to close the gender equity gap in the tech industry, a CU graduating senior who seems poised to help deliver on that very mission, and an expert in engineering who will talk about the responsibility tech companies have in overcoming the world's greatest challenges, and specifically how engineering design can either help us or block us from achieving that mission. We'll also, of course, have time for some questions from the audience a little bit later in the hour. But first, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. She has been a leader in technology for many years and recently celebrated her 25th anniversary with Microsoft. For the past 7 years, she's been the corporate vice president overseeing the company's massive partner ecosystem made up of more than 300,000 organizations worldwide. She's also been a champion of diversity and inclusion initiatives, and just last fall was awarded the prestigious Athena International Leadership Award for her work promoting women in technology. Here to share her recent TED Talk on that very topic is Microsoft's Gavriella Schuster. Gavriella?
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you all for inviting me to speak at this prestigious forum today. You know, when we first got connected about this conference, I was hoping it meant I could come and spend a week in Boulder. Hopefully, I can visit with all of you again next year under better circumstances. Today, I wanted to share my own experiences as a woman in technology, and I'm here to provide you with a framework for how you can become an ally and an agent of change during this most critical crisis in our society. So here's my story. There I was in a gray conference room that felt too small for the people in it, with 4 men sitting across from me, 2 to my left and 1 to my right. And the volume in the room was loud as everyone was brainstorming on the topic. I had something to say, but the discussion was super hard to break into. So I took a deep breath. I raised my voice to match the volume in the room, and I shared my idea. But something strange happened. Nothing, not even a nod of recognition. In that moment, I felt invisible. Has this ever happened to you? So I have to try again. This time, I'm going to do it a little differently. I lower my pitch. I slow down my speech. And instead of just sharing my idea, I talk about my experience on this topic and why I was invited in the room. And then I share my idea. This time, I'm heard. Once again, I had to earn my credibility before I could be heard, despite the fact that I'm a senior executive at a high-tech company, and I was invited into the room. This was not some far distant memory either. This was a meeting that happened a year ago, just before the pandemic hit. And it's not an isolated incident. And it's why I'm here today. It's time for change. I am tired of being the only woman in the room without any allies. And so I am here to enlist you, hopefully to inspire you to take a pledge to disrupt the status quo and drive for gender equity. If you're a man, step into allyship. If you're a woman, step into leadership. We need every one of you to become an agent of change, working with purpose and intention towards gender equity. What do I mean? I'll give you an example. My friend Jennifer Didier, she is the CEO of a technical training company. And like me, she was sick of being the only woman in the room without any men, without any allies, and of looking out at her classroom at a sea of men. So she set aside her profits and created a scholarship fund to give women free technical training and technical certification. And she has so far brought 70 women through on that scholarship and has fundamentally changed their career trajectory. And she's only at the beginning. That's purpose-driven leadership. That's working with intention. That's what I'm talking about. And I personally have taken action to sponsor the creation of 2 communities, the Women in Technology Network and the Women in Cloud. And we have now created connections and access for 20,000 women around the world. And while it's a start, 20,000 is just a drop in the bucket to what we need to drive change. And that's why I'm here. We face a crisis today, and the only way to overcome that crisis is through scale. I need all of you to take intentional action to create a force multiplier effect and to turn 20,000 into 8 million. Why 8 million? Because that's what it's going to take to get to gender equity in the high-tech industry. Do you think I might be exaggerating about this crisis we face? Let me share some statistics with you. In 1991, when I first started in this industry, 36% of the computing workforce was women. By 2019, that number had fallen to 27%. We're going in the wrong direction, and it's about to get much worse. According to the World Economic Forum this past week, with the rate that women are dropping out of the workforce as a result of the pandemic, it will take 135 years to get to gender parity if we don't take any disruptive or intentional action. And 70% of all companies are going through something called a digital transformation. That's where technology is becoming their main competitive advantage, and they're becoming technology-led. That takes technology out of the tech sector into financial services, retail, manufacturing, and even farming. You see this every day when you do your banking, your shopping, or even your entertainment. You reach for technology first, right? This in and of itself is not a bad thing. But what is a bad thing is that the jobs that are being displaced are disproportionately impacting women and people of color. This is a crisis. This is causing a trifecta of badness because by percentage, there are fewer women entering technology, there are more jobs in technology, and there are more women being displaced by the technology. The time for action is now. Do it for yourselves, for your daughters, your mothers, your sisters, your wives. This is not the workforce they should face. Trust me, I know. I've been here for the last 30 years. I thought by the time my daughter was ready to enter the workforce, things would be dramatically better for her. But she is 22 years old now, and things are worse. We need each of you to take action. Luckily, I have developed a simple framework, easy to remember and easy to action, and I'm here to share it with you. 4 steps that you can take to become an ally, a leader, and an agent of change. Just remember this word, become. Be an ally, connect, outreach, mentor, empower. So let me take you through each one of those and what that means. Connect, creating connections for women, helping them network, helping them gain access to you, to your network, and to each other. Access is powerful. You can do this by joining the WIT network, the Women in Cloud, or any one of a dozen other networks designed to bring women into business. Be a force multiplier and help me take 20,000 to 8 million. Connect. Step 2, outreach. This is more active than connection. This is about examining your recruiting, your hiring, and your supplier selection practices. When you post a job description, do you screen out candidates or do you screen them in for diversity? I know within my own organization, when I required my team to stop hiring for expediency or just hiring the people they knew, and required them to create diverse candidate pools of high quality talent with people from outside of our company, and then to have a diverse interview panel, the gender diversity in my team changed dramatically. And now we're working to drive that diversity across all dimensions of diversity. Step 3, mentor. This is how you make the connections and the outreach come to life. Mentorship. I would not be where I am today without the many men and women who have mentored me along the way, who have shared with me the value of their successes, their failures, and who have helped me avoid those tripwires, those unwritten rules of business, and who have lifted me up when my confidence waned. Those 30 minutes that you give to someone else can change their perspective. I know I've experienced that. Be a mentor Blaze a trail for those who follow you. Give back and pay it forward. And lastly, 4, empower. This is about creating an inclusive environment, promoting women, sponsoring women, putting them on your board of directors. And do I urge you to do this just because I'm a woman? No, it's not. A study by the Boston Consulting Group shows that organizations with diverse leadership teams are 19% higher in profitability, with higher levels of employee engagement and higher customer satisfaction, which makes sense, right? Because together they can build products and services that actually reflect the customers they serve. This is not only good for society, this is good for your business. Empowering someone is about making sure that everyone's voice is heard. It's about making the invisible visible by seeing people and hearing people and enabling people to bring their authentic selves to work. I want to share with you my own story of my invisibility cloak. Several years ago, I was on a business trip with a male colleague of mine, and we met with a dozen CEOs, all of them men. In every single one of those meetings, those male CEOs addressed every question and conversation to my male colleague and not me, despite the fact that I was his senior. And even when I answered the question, they would turn to him for validation and confirmation of what I had said. On that trip, I felt like I was wearing an invisibility cloak that I could not shake off. You know, it's ironic. The invisibility cloak in Harry Potter is magical and empowering, but my experience with my invisibility cloak is just the opposite. But how do you remove that invisibility cloak? Allyship. Just imagine that meeting at the beginning that I shared. If just one of those men had simply invited me into the conversation by asking me what I thought, or heard what I had to say the first time, that is allyship. So many of these actions may seem small to you, but they are hugely impactful to the people you touch. Think about it. What could you be doing to make someone more visible, to validate their ideas, to show them that you value their perspective, to really listen, to stay curious and ask questions to understand their story? That is building an inclusive environment. That is allyship. Like my friend, Mel McCutcheon. He's the CEO of Interactive IT in Australia. And he's a founding member of an ally group called Male Champions for Change, devoted to this very issue of gender equity in tech. And he has personally taken a commitment to get to 50% women within his cybersecurity practice. That's working with intention and purpose. You could start big like Mal or Jennifer, or you could start small by just simply acknowledging what a woman has said, listening to her, seeing her, hearing her, empowering her. Whether you start big or you start small, no matter where, just start. Just remember this one word: become. Become an ally. Take action. Connect, outreach, mentor, and empower. Become an ally, a leader, and an agent of change through intentional actions for the sake of yourselves, your daughters, your mothers, your sisters, and your wives. Let's take action together to become a force multiplier, to respond in the face of this crisis, and to drive for gender equity. Make the invisible visible and help a woman to take off her invisibility cloak.
Thank you, Gavriella. Wow, that's a powerful message there. I've actually heard you give that TED Talk a couple times, and each time it's moving, eye-opening too, and inspiring. And I think something that is really remarkable about this become framework that you've come up with is how versatile it is. It's not just about gender equity, although there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work to do in many places, and so your become framework can really be applied to every community, right?
That's right, Jeff. It's really about creating inclusion and understanding for everyone, bringing equity to women, the Black and African American community, the Asian American community, the LGBTQ community, all people who are marginalized, underrepresented, or victimized because of who they are. And with that, I do want to take a moment and add my condolences and hope for the Boulder community. Like you said, far too many families and communities have been through tragedies like this that can be and should be prevented. I hope for all of us, we can create the change that is long overdue.
Indeed, well said. And in fact, the closing keynote for this conference will specifically be addressing gun violence. It is indeed time for a change. Okay, I'd like to bring another person into the conversation now. It's a University of Colorado student who has been instrumental in bringing the conversation around women in technology to the forefront here at CU. She's a senior graduating this spring with a degree in business with an emphasis on information analytics and finance. She's a scholar in the President's Leadership class and the student director of the Business and Engineering Technology Scholars Program. Please welcome Maria Nenova. Maria, welcome. How are you? I know you've been working a lot with students to help encourage them and guide them in their journey towards careers in technology, and specifically your work with the B-Tech Scholars Program. You've really been focused on bringing more women into technology, so I'm sure you have some great questions lined up for Gavriella, so I'll let you take it away.
Thank you both for having me here today. It's an absolute honor to have this conversation with you, and I'll dive in with my first question. You talked about the 4 actions every person can take on an individual level: connect, outreach, mentor, and empower. But are there any specific policies or programs you think companies and organizations should be implementing that aren't yet the standard?
Yeah, absolutely, Maria. Thanks for asking. I love what many states and countries are doing relative to requiring CEOs to have a diverse public board of directors. I also believe every company ought to report publicly their diversity statistics, not just for gender, but for all underrepresented groups. And likewise, there ought to be the same public reporting on supplier diversity. Organizations also should be held to meet accessibility and sustainability standards. We need to raise the bar on corporate responsibility in our society to help us disrupt the status quo and close these gaps.
Those are excellent points. We talk a lot about corporate social responsibility in our coursework. So it's great to see that it's an active conversation that top executives are having. Speaking of disrupting the status quo, when some people think high tech, it can sound intimidating. The image of coding and general stereotypes about tech. How do you define tech? And what would you say to women who maybe don't have a traditional tech background, such as a computer science degree, but have an interest in the industry?
Yeah, it's true. The way that the academic system treats technology is very narrow, and it really needs to be updated. There are literally thousands of different jobs in high tech, from those that are grounded in innovating on the technology through to those that are closer to delivering and supporting the customer. I didn't have a background in high tech, but I learned on the job. And for me, I think the key skill sets are around curiosity, growth mindset, that really you can learn anything, and the willingness to try by doing. Content can be learned. And actually, the foundation of the technologies today have all sorts of aids that make it even easier than ever. So I say, go for it.
Thank you for the words of encouragement. It's certainly what I plan to do after graduation, along with our current and incoming B-Tech scholars. So both in the program and in school, we often talk about putting together our own personal board of directors. Who did you informally or formally put on your board? And who would you recommend to people watching to sit on their boards?
Well, so I have a personal board of directors of about a dozen people. These are folks that I reach out to when I'm facing an interesting challenge or a big decision, or when I feel stuck and I just need a sounding board. I've selected these individuals throughout my career because they have skills and experiences that I admire, and I believe them to have a fairly consistent values as my own. So I've published a blog on the difference between sponsors, mentors, and coaches, because they're very different. It's important to know the difference in what you're asking of someone. So mentors are people who possess skills or experiences that you want to learn from. Coaches are people who are great listeners, who have a neutral stance relative to your role and are willing to ask you hard questions to help you think through your options and your approach. And here I really recommend that you have a diverse board of directors so that they can bring to you different perspectives. And then you don't really ask people to be your sponsor, but you need them. They become your sponsor because they see value in you and your skills and your experience, and they want to promote you even when you're not in the room. The reality is that you need all three in your network.
That's a great point you bring up about being able to differentiate between a sponsor and a mentor and a coach. It's a conversation that I just find really interesting, and it's definitely essential when putting together your personal board of directors. At Microsoft, you have a reputation for being an excellent leader and a manager. What skills do you find help you in being able to mentor and manage people?
What I would say is ask questions and listen more than you speak. Help people get clear on the outcomes. Set a visual image. Try and make it as tangible as possible of what raving success would look like on that task or the initiative at hand, and then let people define their own steps to get there. And be there to support and guide them. Be a sounding board. Encourage risk-taking and build a confidence. Those are the steps I have employed that I've really helped people bloom and blossom within our organization.
I really appreciate that you mentioned the importance of risk-taking and helping people build their confidence. I mean, it's an essential skill in the upcoming workforce and just the world. You have spoken throughout your career about the importance of being authentic. At what point in your career did you find your personal brand identity?
It's a great question. I think it's important to be intentional about who you are and to know what your superpowers are and what makes you special. And I know that when you're younger in career, when you're still in school, it may be harder to figure that out, but it's important to maybe do something like Strength Finders or finding a way to know what makes you stand out. It's really more important than trying to manage your image, because when you try and manage your image, you're not being authentic. And invariably, you're hiding aspects of yourself that you don't think meet that image. For me, I wish I'd realized that earlier. I realized that maybe about 15 years ago that I just had to be me. And that inflection point was when someone told me that they couldn't read me, which was so opposite of everything my mother had always said to me. My mother had always said, "Oh, you wear your emotions on your sleeve." And I realized what I was doing was I was covering. I was trying to be more stoic because I was afraid to be too emotional. And it was robbing me of authentic relationships.
I think that's such a powerful message to send, especially to the young people watching today. It's so important to be authentic in our lives and in our work. And it also leads me into my next question. You mentioned the importance of having allies. How have you seen men you work with being allies, and what did that look like?
When a man steps in to be an ally, it means that they are engaging with you and supporting you, sponsoring you, and being that secondary voice to make sure that you don't get talked over. For instance, in that conference room, asking me what I thought, repeating what I said and crediting me for what I said, building on my ideas. It's about creating that inclusive environment and those inclusive behaviors of listening, engaging proactively, sponsoring, and supporting. That's what allyship is all about.
Absolutely. I think that having these conversations is what's going to help inspire the next generation of leaders to become allies in their respective fields. So it's a really exciting topic, being able to talk about that today. At Microsoft, you are the leader for Microsoft's ecosystem of partners around the world that sell your products and services to customers. When the pandemic struck, those organizations were able to quickly help communities keep their employees working remotely. How have you found that working from home brings more complexity in being able to empower your employees, especially women and historically underrepresented groups? And if so, what advice do you have for people looking to advocate for themselves and others in a virtual environment?
That's a great question. We've all had different experiences on this, and while working remotely has its downsides, especially for those of us like me who are extroverts and get a lot of energy from really seeing people and engaging with them every day, I found that it actually has made it easier to create an inclusive culture. When we were in the office, some folks still called in remotely and some were in the room. So there was a mix. And there was a high probability that those calling in were not as included in the dialogue because people would forget. Also, people in the room seemed to feel more comfortable interrupting and talking over each other and even talking over the people on the phone. And so with everyone being in the remote work, it leveled the playing field. And we had to learn and develop really this new etiquette, new norms around conference calls. And it enabled us from the start to set norms, I think, that were more inclusive, to use the hand raise features before speaking, not to interrupt, to go round robin to hear from everyone. So relative to your question on how to be a great ally in this environment, I think the chat window is a great way. You could use that to call attention to an idea someone just shared, to reinforce and support it in a written way, like, oh, love what you just said, Maria, right? To encourage someone on the call to chime in via chat during the meeting without calling them out, and to repeat what someone has said in order to reinforce them and give them credit.
Those are great suggestions, Gavriella. Working at Microsoft, we have seen sort of an evolution of some of those actions taking place, and I hope that that's something that really proliferates in other organizations. And I think it is, because we're having this conversation over and over again because it's needed. Maria, thank you for those questions. Maria will be back in just a little bit to talk a little bit more and actually have some questions from the audience as well. But that last question, Gavriella, I think was a good segue into our next segment. And she mentioned Microsoft partners, and I know you've referred to partner organizations that work with Microsoft as the digital first responders over the past year because of the pandemic. Let's talk a little bit more about what Microsoft partners do and how important they are when it comes to this movement of digital transformation, which you talked about a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jeff. So, Microsoft is a platform company. That means we build products and services for work, home, and learning environments across every industry around the world. As a platform company, our portfolio is broad and it's not really purpose-built. In order to customize it into a customer's environment and for the purpose the customer has, we rely on partnerships. Our partner organizations are the delivery arm that bring those technologies to life. They connect them to the customer's business and light up the platforms that are relevant for the customer. They take that last mile that connects the dots for the end customer to make the technology work. With COVID, our partners have been instrumental in helping businesses drive to continuity in their own organizations. They've responded. They have delivered products and services that have helped companies to keep people working, applications that help governments track the spread of the virus and manage social services. They've helped our customers to recover by enabling business continuity and resilience through the technology. And they've helped now customers start to reimagine their businesses post-pandemic, rethinking their business operations, thinking about what the best practices are of what they've learned through the pandemic and how they can apply that on an ongoing basis with the technology. Our partners are key to bringing digital capabilities to companies in every industry.
And that really actually comes, I think, with a responsibility for partner organizations to not only deliver for their customers and keep up with their competition, but also to be creating solutions and services that really are benefiting everyone, inclusive solutions and services. And I know your organization at Microsoft is doing a lot of work around helping those partners understand the importance of supporting an inclusive economy. Can you talk a little bit about what is an inclusive economy?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jeff. An inclusive economy is an economy that's built on participation, equity, growth, stability, and sustainability. It's a framework where inclusive growth strategies lead to shared prosperity, especially for communities that face the greatest barriers to equal social participation. So I want to give you an example. For 3 million people in East Africa, kerosene was the main source of energy. But kerosene is dangerous, it costs a lot of money, and it isn't very efficient for producing electricity. That's where one of our Microsoft partners, Copa Solar, comes in. They developed an IoT solution, that's Internet of Things solution, that brings the power of solar energy, clean, sustainable energy to their homes. The solution, built on Microsoft Azure, gives the families access to lighting, phone charging, radio, and TV for just 50 cents a day, the same amount they paid for lighting alone with kerosene. So that solution tapped into a new market opportunity. That family is now plugged in, quite literally, to the economy that they were on the outside of before. The partner organization, Copa Solar, is bridging the technical divide and unlocking economic potential for 3 million people, enabling them to become part of our global economy. We want to do everything we can at Microsoft to enable organizations to contribute in this same way. And that's the idea behind the channel inclusion framework that we've been working on, that leaders on my team have been enabling partners to participate in.
What's the response been? How are these organizations responding? Do you think they're buying in, and do they understand the importance of building for impact and inclusion?
Yeah, more and more I see our partners sharing plans around inclusion and sustainability. They're seeing that more than ever, people are searching for purpose, ways they can drive change and make a difference in the world. And employees and customers are changing their expectations of the organizations they work with. They want to partner with companies that are prioritizing purpose. I think business leaders are starting to see the social and economic value of doing just that. And Microsoft is in a unique position with a global ecosystem of partners to drive for change and really lead by example. So I'm really proud of the work that we've been doing ourselves, led by Satya Nadella. As a global corporation, Microsoft is committed to reducing and ultimately eliminating our carbon footprint. By 2030, we'll be carbon negative. And by 2050, we will have removed from the environment all the carbon the company ever emitted since 1975. And with our sustainable data center design initiative, we're delivering renewable solar energy and replenishing the water supply for the communities where our data centers are built. And we're partnering with organizations to discover how we can reduce environmental impact. And our partners are helping to build those tools on the Microsoft technology platform to help.
And I think that what's interesting is some of the conversations I know you've had with partner organizations is the market opportunity for those companies. There's an opportunity for them to grow because of these inclusive solutions and services, right?
Absolutely. Customers are looking for ways they can make a difference. So by developing products and solutions that drive change, they're opening new revenue opportunities. For instance, that predicted global economic growth from climate change and sustainability solutions is $26 trillion. The gain by reaching gender parity in the workplace is $12 trillion. And it's cyclical. According to research, companies that are purpose-driven see significantly higher levels of innovation and employee retention. Creating that culture of purpose helps them to capture the inclusive market opportunity. It's kind of like I said in my TED Talk. Organizations with diverse leadership teams have 19% higher profitability because a diverse leadership team is creating products and services that better reflects the diversity of their customer base.
Yeah. I know one of the guiding principles for that initiative your team is working on is to enable a diverse partner ecosystem that is producing those inclusive solutions and services. And specifically last summer, Microsoft announced an initiative around just that. Can you talk a little bit about the Black and African American Partner Growth Initiative? How did that idea come up?
Yeah, so we wanted to do something. We needed to do something to address the racial injustice that plagues us in the US. So last June, we took a look inside our own ecosystem and recognized that we have an opportunity to better support and engage with underrepresented groups in a more proactive way. So our work with Black and African American owned businesses is just one pillar as a part of our broader effort to address racial injustice. We stood up a program like the programs that we have around women in technology to help guide new and existing partners through the Microsoft Partner Network and to help ensure they're unlocking the key resources and connections that will aid in their business growth.
And you have some specific objectives with that initiative, right?
Yeah, so we're looking to grow our Black and African American owned representation within the ecosystem by over 20% over the next 3 years. And we're only 6 months into this multi-year initiative. Our goal is to make sustainable change within the next 5 years.
How do you do that as an organization that is promoting this change? But how do you get it done, and how's it going so far?
Well, so it's really designed to give organizations that are owned by any minority, but specifically in this case, Black and African American owned businesses, access to key resources and investment dollars within our partner programs to give them personalized guidance with our go-to-market initiative and help them on their path to sustainable growth. So it's about helping them identify market opportunity within their communities, helping them to understand how to build that business, giving them access to investments and funding, and then building that go-to-market by really bringing their solutions out into the marketplace. So far, we've uncovered and engaged with several thousand minority-owned businesses, and the number of Black and African American-owned tech businesses has doubled since January. So I think we're heading in the right direction, but there is a lot of work still to be done.
There certainly is. It really sounds like it comes down to creating access and delivering impact for organizations that may need to see a path for them to go to market. That's great. Thank you, Gavriella. It takes the conversation into another area I want to discuss, this creating access in intentional actions, specifically the role tech companies have, like Microsoft have, in helping to solve some of the challenges we face as a society today, not just in the US, but really around the world. And for this segment, I wanted to bring in another expert in this area, Dr. Janet Tsai. She is a mechanical engineering and design professor at the University of Colorado Boulder. Her research focuses on encouraging students from non-traditional demographic groups to pursue careers in engineering. And a specific area of Dr. Tsai's research that I think is fascinating is all about identifying the social and cultural impacts of technological design. In other words, examining the way many traditional design constructs are inherently exclusionary rather than inclusive. Dr. Tsai, thanks for joining us. I know that's just one aspect of your research, but did I summarize it accurately?
Yes, you did a great job. The only thing I would add is it's not just the designs themselves that are inherently inclusive or exclusive, but it's even the way we've been trained as engineers and designers to think about our jobs.
Yeah, true. Well, Gavriella and I both have some questions for you today. Gavriella, do you want to start?
Sure. So Janet, we've talked about, you have a new course called Design for Inclusion. That sounds very popular. So I'd love to hear more about the coursework and the feedback that you're hearing from students and from the organization outside of academia.
Wonderful. So I'm offering this course for the first time this spring, and it really, similar to you, I was called to action based on the events of last summer, based on how we're living through the pandemic. And so in the fall, it came up to say, hey, can we teach this class? Because students want to know how to grapple with some of these big issues in their work. Through the course of this semester, it's been a really rapid journey as far as developing curriculum and sharing it with students as well as just outwardly. So through my own personal social media presence, just sharing snippets of our lessons, I've been amazed at how many of my friends who are working engineers are grappling with the exact same issues of, wow, how do I make sure that my designs are as inclusive as I want them to be? As a result, it's fun. There's discussion groups that are happening in professional engineering organizations and industries, in addition to in my class. What's been fascinating in talking to some of these organizations, one of the HR managers sat down with me and she said, wow, all of our diversity and inclusion initiatives so far have been focused on how we treat each other, all focused on interpersonal communication. She said, wow, but what you're talking about, Janet, is actually incorporating diversity and inclusion into our work, into our design of our products. And it really highlighted to me the disconnect that has been surrounding a lot of this discussion so far. And so to really think about how do we integrate this together? So right, it is how we treat each other, it is how we talk to one another, but it's also in the work that we do, especially as engineers and designers.
That's really interesting. Jenna, can you talk a little about some real life examples of the biases that exist in technological engineering? I'm sure you could talk for days about examples you see every day because you're tuned into it and you recognize it maybe more so than others do. But can you give us some like real life examples?
Absolutely. And so in the class, we've used tons of great examples because it helps to make it very concrete. And engineers and I think students love examples. So one very obvious one is the Flint water crisis, where we see there's all these different stakeholders and everyone cares about public health. Everyone, we believe, environmental justice should have access to clean water. And yet, why is that so hard? And to see how this case has played out through the years and having incredible documentation about all the different perspectives of those people involved. So we can see, oh, is it someone's fault? Or how do we even trace how this situation comes to bear, even in a place like the United States? You said something important, Jeff, about the ability to recognize these things. And so often I think we take the world for granted and we don't get a chance to really analyze some of these situations. And so a big part of the class has just been to say, what are the frameworks that we use? And how do we define problems? And are there perspectives that are missing even in what we see? Because once you're able to see something, similar to your point earlier about being invisible or being seen, right? Once you start to see these things, then we can start to analyze them, then we can start to do something about them. And so a big part of the class has just been saying, how do we remove some of these barriers to seeing that have been prevalent in your training thus far, so that we can train ourselves to better realize when are we not including certain populations in our problem statements and then in our solutions as well.
Yeah, interesting. Gavriella, do you have any examples of design bias that stand out to you?
Yeah, for sure. There are obvious examples, Jeff, like sidewalks that don't have ramps and crosswalks that don't have the audible alert when it's safe to cross. But with technology, it's a little trickier because you don't necessarily see the biases clearly. With artificial intelligence, for example, the design of any AI system starts with the choice of training the data, which is the first place where unfairness can arise. Training data should sufficiently represent the world in which we live, or at least part of the world where the AI system will operate. But consider an AI system that enables facial recognition or emotion detection. If it's trained solely on the image of adult faces, it may not accurately identify the features or the expressions of children because of the differences in facial structure. But ensuring the representation of that data is not enough. Racism and sexism can also creep into that societal data. Training an AI system on such data may inadvertently lead to results that perpetuate harmful biases. One example could be an AI system designed to help employees screen job applicants. When trained on data from public employment record, this system might learn that most software developers are men. As a result, it may favor men over women when selecting candidates for software development positions, even though the company deploying the system is seeking to promote diversity through its hiring practices. So technology can perpetuate bias, or it can be a facilitator to more inclusion. We need to be guardians for good on that. So Jenna, what I'm curious about is how do we bring about this change and what it will take to create this evolution towards inclusive design? Because it seems like we're at this inflection point where people are thinking and talking about these things more than ever before: diversity, sustainability, inclusive economy, and inclusive design. But there has historically been a gap between awareness and action. So Jenna, what do you think it will take to turn the tide?
Well, I love this question because this idea we're moving forward, right? We're making a change. And I think that being at the university is an incredible place to see that type of transformational action start to happen. And so literally for me, since my job as an engineering educator is to try and train the next generation of engineers and designers, and to explicitly train them in a way that is different from the way they've been trained before. A lot of people get into engineering because they like math and science. That's great. But we also want to recognize that we are humans, right? We're all a member of this culture. We're a member of this society. And engineers cannot ignore that. We need to define our jobs in a way that includes political power and social consciousness. to realize that, hey, we need to think about these consequences in our designs as opposed to just making sure we get the right answer. I think a lot of people, engineers, anyone right now, we're afraid we're going to do something wrong, right? We're afraid we're going to offend somebody. We're going to say the wrong thing. But more and more, we need to become comfortable with having these conversations so it becomes more and more normal to say, hey, can you analyze my design and tell me if I'm forgetting somebody, if I'm not including an important perspective here? We need to open up that dialogue and make it normal, as so it becomes default rather than something that's a surprise or something that's not easily included. I also think nowadays people are more, hopefully, our students, they're conscious, right? They're aware of their impact on the world. They're aware of their impact on one another. And so to, again, normalize that concept of taking individual action, realizing that we are political and social agents and that we have the power to make change.
Yeah, you brought up a couple of really interesting points there, Janet, that I think we could do a whole other session on, and that's specifically, this cancel culture and people being afraid of making a decision and then doing it wrong, and then the negativity that can come from that. So really interesting ideas there. Technology, of course, is playing an ever increasing role in every aspect of our lives, reshaping industries, influencing global markets with new products and services. And as Gavriella said before, for legacy companies, technology is kind of becoming the actual business. They're the part of their business. So what about the role technology companies play in creating that change? Gavriella, I think of the work Microsoft is doing around accessibility with its products. What are your thoughts about the role technology companies have in creating the change?
Well, like I said, I think it is time for corporate America to really step up and assume that responsibility and accountability. So, Microsoft has developed accessibility standards that lay out requirements that our products have to meet in multiple areas. So, vision, accessibility tools and features for people who are blind, colorblind, or have low vision, larger and brighter screens, fonts and colors that are easy to see, and a screen reader to read the text. Hearing, for those who have hearing loss or deafness, we have closed captioning, mono sound, and live call transcription, much like what we're seeing today. Neurodiversity, dictation and sign-in features that make the digital world more accessible for those who live with dyslexia, seizures, autism, or other cognitive disabilities. And mobility, for people who have arthritis, quadriplegia, spinal cord injuries, and other mobility issues. We help them navigate the digital world in non-traditional ways with unique controllers and devices.
And I think what's interesting about the position Microsoft plays is being able to enable our partner organizations to build solutions and services around this accessibility and these inclusive products, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. This is where our partners really shine. One of my favorite is from a partner in Sweden that worked with partners to develop a predictive screening for dyslexia with the camera on a tablet. So when people with dyslexia read, their eyes move differently and they track words in different patterns. So using Microsoft's Azure Cloud Platform, our partner built an app that tracks a user's eyes while they read and uses predictive analytics to determine if they have dyslexia. So at Microsoft, we consider accessibility a core responsibility for our customers and an opportunity for our partner organizations to deliver inclusive solutions and services to the world.
Dr. Tsai, what are your thoughts about that? The responsibility of companies, not only technology companies, but organizations in all verticals to drive the change that's needed.
Absolutely. And I think an easy way to think about it maybe is along 3 axes: access, recruitment, and retention. This is often the way we think about bringing people into engineering. But I think with the access point, there's so many ways in which we're developing a public image of what counts as big tech, what counts as engineering, what counts as innovation. And to think about what are we really celebrating there? And are there ways to expand those definitions so that we start to celebrate, all kinds of different things, enabling people to visualize themselves in one of those futures? As far as recruitment, right? When you start looking at who is going to work at a various job, what are you looking for? I think Gavriella touched on this earlier as well. In engineering, they often prepare themselves for a technical interview. And yet, are those questions in the technical interview really what they're going to be grappling with at their jobs? Is it possible to incorporate some social questions into those interviews as well to get a sense for, have these people considered, again, the social and political consequences of their designs? Do they have the ability to think and empathize with people who are different than themselves? Is there a way for us to realize that that is an important skill that we can actually train for and try and locate in prospective employees? I also think it's very important for everyone to always be aware of how are we defining these problems? How are we defining these roles? And do people have the ability to think outside of those roles and to bring in people who might have different perspectives? And again, just this broader diversity of experiences. Then as far as retention, how do we make sure people feel at home in these new fields? Realizing that, oh, we have a historical legacy, of some limited demographics, of some existing cultures, but what does it take to really shift those cultures to make sure that people, again, can visualize themselves and feel at home there? We talked a little bit about how to bring people into engineering and thinking about outreach and recruiting. I know that it's risky, right? A lot of times these STEM careers are thought of as difficult, or, going to get an engineering degree is thought of as something that is hard. But at the same time, is there a way to even shift that image to say, well, it's achievable with hard work, the growth mindset also that Gavriella mentioned, and to say, well, you can do it, right? Anyone can do it. But to eliminate some of that risk barrier to make it seem achievable so that, again, we can start to bring in people whose voices have not been heard traditionally in this field. Because I think that that is one huge thing that will start to drive the change forward that we're all looking for.
I agree. I think the ideas you have are similar to the Become framework that I've been talking about, right? Creating the right connections, outreach to screen in for diversity, mentoring to build that next generation of diverse leadership, and empowering people to be their authentic selves and give voice to everyone.
Yeah. Janet mentioned something, Gavriella, that I wanted to bring up as well. I know you've talked before about STEM programs and curriculum and how sometimes STEM can inadvertently steer students away from careers in technology. Can you share some of your observations around that?
Yeah, technology industry is filled with jobs that are not hardcore coding jobs. As I've talked about before, there are literally thousands of jobs within the high-tech industry that go far beyond software development. And they range from those closest to the innovation and the technology all the way to enabling customers to use it. And my own experience, my daughter was in the STEM program in her high school, but she told me when she was in it that she wasn't interested in a career in STEM because she didn't want to just be with all the boys all the time. It took a lot of convincing on my part to help her see all the possibilities in the world around her and keep her from dropping out of classes that she loved because of the bias towards the boys. So I'm happy to say she's graduating in June with a degree in kinesiology and pursuing a master's in exercise physiology. So she stayed with it. So Janet, what are some of your thoughts about that?
I agree that some of our images of STEM can be really off-putting. And so it's fascinating to say, can we change those images? I asked my students in my class the other day, when you picture an engineer, can you picture yourself? And even that can be a challenge. So as engineers, we're kind of saddled with this Cold War legacy. The last time the engineering education full curriculum was really remodeled was during the Cold War. And what's fun at CU locally, that's the last time our engineering center building, our funny concrete structure, that's when it was built. And so you can see we are literally grappling with this Cold War legacy every day, and that's what our students are being trained with. However, we know that the problems of the world have changed significantly, since that era. And so we have to think, are we matching our curriculum to the current needs? A lot of technological challenges have been solved, right? But now we have these really broad, cross-cutting global issues like global warming, right? Like climate change. And so to say, what can we do? How do we bring new problem solvers, new perspectives that are not technically narrow, rather that are broad and can think about people in these new ways to try and solve these big new challenges and come up with brand new solutions, brand new viewpoints, things that we haven't even thought about yet.
Yeah, so there are a few different things to unpack in there, and it's changing perception, changing education and curriculum, and it's like kind of turning the Titanic, right? So what is the call to action? What kind of actionable steps can people take to help bring the changes we've been talking about? Jenna, let's start with you.
Sure. I think on an individual level, we can all start to be a little bit more consciously aware about the things that we consume, whether that is a physical consumable or even just the information that we're taking in, and to be aware that we get to choose, right? We get to choose what types of organizations we support, what type of products we put our money behind. and also to raise our voices, right? If you are using something and you realize that it was never intended for you, is there a way to contact the company and tell them that? Is there a way to organize or create a better solution so that, again, we can start to visualize some of these alternative pathways and realize that we have these broader abilities? When our needs aren't being met, can we find whose fault it is? And can we start to take steps to change that? I'm excited to think that, wow, in this new economy, in this new world, how do we exercise our power? And first of all, how do we realize and visualize that we do have that power to make those changes?
Yeah, really interesting. Gavriella, any thoughts about actions people can take?
Yeah, from an engineering perspective, I think it starts with bringing together diverse populations into the planning process to understand their needs and how the tech can support them. At Microsoft, we call this customer-focused and inclusive design. Another thing is to expand people's ability to participate in the economy. Microsoft is dedicated to the democratization of the technology. Our partners around the world play a critical role because they know their customers' needs better than anyone else. Engineering and technology are the ultimate problem solvers. So let's fine tune the tools we have so they're more inclusive from the start and use them to make bigger impact.
It's interesting because it does feel, Gavriella, you mentioned it, like we're kind of at an inflection point where we might be able to really make that change from acknowledgement to action. So I'm sure you gave the audience some great ideas and perspective in this conversation. I want to thank both of you. I love hearing the perspective from thought leaders like you on these subjects. So, and Dr. Tsai, I think we've just learned why there's a wait list to get into your classes these days. So thank you both very much. I want you both to stay put though, because we're going to bring Maria Nanova back in as we move into an audience Q&A segment. Maria, I think, has been kind of monitoring for some questions from the audience. She's going to be moderating this segment as we close out the session here in the next 10 minutes. Maria, I think you're back. Do you have any questions from the audience yet?
I do. Since we're live, we've been able to take in questions on YouTube. So I'll jump in with one of our first audience questions. Hannah asks, Gavriella, you mentioned two groups taking steps towards becoming an ally. How do those who don't work at Microsoft get involved in them?
Oh, well, so I mean, anybody can actually join those. Those are global and open. So the Women in Technology Network, we could probably post the link to become a member. The Women in Cloud. There's actually about a dozen different organizations, and I'll provide you with the full list where women can just join those networks, and it gives them access to each other, gives them access to the people in those networks. And then I would say for the men, the allies, we want you to join those as well. These are not exclusive to women. They are just about bringing women into the workforce.
Wonderful. We also have a question from Arlene. Can you discuss the inherent privilege in being able to seek to be authentic?
Yeah, I mean that's I understand that question. It's about it's when people have expectations of you, and you cover because you don't want to appear like the group they are associating you with, and it's hard. And I do understand. Like I know I have white privilege associated with the fact that I don't maybe have as many constraints around that. I think it's important, though, to know that you have, like in your soul, you have value, you are unique. And when you can bring your authentic self, when you can get past maybe some of the stereotypes and the ways that people put you in a box, and you break out of that, you become a whole person and you tell your story. And by telling your story in your authentic voice, you can break through all of those preconceived notions.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Kenzie. Do you have any unconventional advice for the next generation of women leaders in tech?
Well, I will answer that, and then I'll actually ask Dr. Tsai if she wants to share some advice too. I would say if you can imagine it, you can create it. Technology has enabled us to work without limitations, to be persistent. And so don't be afraid to fail, and enlist your allies in your vision and chart the course towards that innovation. So Dr. Tsai, do you have any advice?
I agree with what you've said, and also this idea of it can be hard to stand out, right? No one wants to be the first one sometimes because it puts you on an elevated platform. But at the same time, is there a way to actually turn that into an advantage, right? Sometimes being able to be so easily recognized, that can be a pro, even if it's a con a little bit. But is there a way for you to visualize that and say, no, this is a strength that I bring to this. I might be the only one that looks like me here, but what can I actually do with that so that people remember me and they remember me favorably? And turns out that can be a great way to advance your career and at least be memorable.
Absolutely.
Those are great points from both of you. And I think the next question I can ask to both of you as well. What is the greatest gift you've ever given yourself?
When I gave myself the gift to fail, when I finally realized that the fastest path to success was to try and fail and learn and then try again. When I could overcome my fear of failure and my desire to get everything just right, I realized that I could open up my aperture to engaging with others in a more collaborative way, and that it was okay. I mean, you're going to fail like 70% of the time, and so so giving yourself permission to do that is a huge gift, and it was for me.
I think right along with that, for me, it's been learning how to ask for help and figuring out when is good to ask for help. And also realizing that some of my past stories have power. And actually, it's worth sharing some of my past experiences because other people can learn from them and I can learn from them as well. But that involves being vulnerable, right? Again, sharing things that have happened to me and realizing, is this a gift, right? Same ideas. Can I turn this pro kind of into or a con into a pro and make it something that is moving us forward and getting people to understand more of where we want to be?
I love both of those. Those are great perspectives because and both of them are allowing yourself to be uncomfortable and being comfortable in that discomfort, right? I mean, being out there and exposed, being vulnerable, being fine with failure is a hard one, and we say something at Microsoft where you want to fail fast. Go out and fail fast and get up fast too, because the technology, the industry is moving faster than you can run. So if you're down for too long, then we're gonna be in trouble. So fail fast and recover fast too. Maria, were there any other questions?
Yes, there was. Elise asked a question to, I think, me specifically. Are you? What techniques do you have to share with other students to help your voice be heard? My quick piece of advice as I look back on my 4 years of college is just ask. There are so many opportunities out there, and sometimes all you have to do is ask. Someone once told me the worst they can do is say no. So go for it. Whatever your goals are, just ask. And then I see another question coming in. What causes do you use to gauge trust in conversations?
I think that as Dr. Tsai said, it's vulnerability, right? When I'm vulnerable, I can create trust with the people that I am talking to. When I am willing to admit that I don't know something, or that I'm not good at something, or to ask for help, then it creates that level of trust with the person I'm talking to and brings them into a state where we can really have a more authentic conversation.
I think similarly, trust may not be instantaneous, and I think we probably shouldn't expect it to be, And as a protective measure for ourselves, you get to gauge. Again, this is a self-empowerment idea to say in any conversation, right? I choose what I get to divulge. I choose how I'm going to position myself. But over time, based on certain cues, right? Based off of, is it eye contact? Is it the way they're responding to me? Can we start to build a foundation of trust in which we can both become more vulnerable, open to sharing, and open to more transformation along the way?
Those are great. Maria, are there any other questions?
From the audience at this time, I don't believe so. So if anybody has any final closing thoughts.
Yeah, great. Maria, thank you very much. Dr. Sai, and of course, Gavriella, an inspirational hour kicking off the 2021 Conference on World Affairs. Great way to get started with what is sure to be an informative week of discussions and stories. And I want to thank all three of you. And Gavriella, do you have any final thoughts for the audience today?
Yeah, I would just encourage everyone to remember the simple framework. One word you can all do: become. Become an ally. 4 simple steps: connect, outreach, mentor, and empower. I developed the Become framework with gender equity in mind, but really it could be used for all underrepresented communities. There have been so many incidents recently that have highlighted the need to support each other and to be allies for one another. We can't be bystanders any longer. We need to take intentional action to drive for inclusion in every community in every corner of the world. We are in this together.
Indeed. Well said. Thank you, Gavriella. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of the 2021 Conference on World Affairs. Thanks, and have a great day.